Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 years ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1966 and looks at what's different between then and now. This week, The Highlanders, Episode 3, still by non-existent Elwyn Jones and glaringly less than good Jerry Davis. I'm Ben.
I am Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go, into the news from 1966. On Monday, December the 26th, known as Boxing Day to you Westerners, the third phase of the Cultural Revolution in China began. Chinese Communist Party printed editorials directed the Red Guards to become revolutionary rebels and to carry the revolution into the factories and farms, whether they wanted or not. This is sort of essentially the point where Mao has a god complex and does a few purges, and then comes the America enticing bit and opening itself up to international relations.
But you could argue, because of how bad this is, once Mao dies, there's so much will in China to go the complete opposite way that Mao was trying to take them towards the end, with the exception of cozying up to the US.
On Tuesday, December the 27th, the city of Hal in North Yemen, supporting the former king of Yemen in a civil war against the Yemen Arab Republic, look it up, was attacked by Egyptian bombers using poison gas against the inhabitants. Egypt and
This
Israel.
is a Cold War proxy conflict, pretty much. One side is pro-communist, or at least supported by the Soviet Union, etc., and the other side is more supported by the West. This is just the lesser-known North-South Vietnam with no Western soldiers, isn't it? Pretty much.
The Middle East has its own bash-up, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much how Yemen is now. That's the unknown conflict. Poor old Yemen. It's not... No one in the West cares much about it.
Is it a resource for oil, or was it?
No, it's the only country in the Arabian Peninsula with no oil. So therefore, the West doesn't care.
Yeah. Back to China. On Wednesday, December the 28th, China conducted its fifth nuclear test, developing a triple-stage bomb, which is the precursor to a hydrogen bomb. 300 kilotons. The dirtiest one, or so it's claimed, which maximizes radiation and fallout. And the next test is in 6 months' time, June 17th, 1967, which is going to be a hydrogen bomb. Whoopee.
How long did it take the West to move from their precursor to... What was actually dropped on the Japanese countries?
It was an atomic bomb, of a very low yield compared to what, lower than what we're talking here, lower than that. But we had atomic, the Americans had H bombs by the early to mid 50s, didn't they?
Yeah, no, that's only because they were fully engaged in the arms race against the Soviet Union, which I think got at the end of the mid 50s.
Can we see any similarities between China growing as a nuclear power and North Korea in the modern day, starting to test nuclear weapons, starting to research them as best it can?
Well, it's certainly not the rhetoric. It's
and there's probably the same... Well, I would say this was the same motivation is, at this point in the late 60s, China's diplomatically isolated because it's no longer really friends with the Soviet Union, and most other communist countries, including North Vietnam and whatnot. North Korea is going to be totally unsuccessful. At this point in time, it's so isolated. Only China is the only reason that North Korea hasn't been invaded.
And finally, on Friday, December the 30th, American and South Vietnamese troops crossed the border into Cambodia to pursue a fleeing Viet Cong force, conducting a ground and air assault on the village of Ba Phu. this is the genesis of the invasion of Cambodia a few years later, under the pretense of, there are communists, let's kill them.
Yeah, so this is just showing that the war is expanding in Vietnam. It's not winding down. It's getting more intense as we head into the new year.
Pretty much. And that was the news. And now we shall look into episode 3 of the Highlanders. I'm going to say that approximately 2 minutes of it are interesting, which is barely a 12th of the episode. It's a long one. It's a talky one. It's a boring one.
Well, you say this is a long one, and you say that 2 minutes is a 12th of it, but this is actually the shortest episode we have. Officially, this is the first one in season 4 to have broken the 23-minute barrier, and some cuts come in at about 22 minutes. So, and even in that story of this length, nothing happens. This is a complete failure. It is a failure of storytelling. It failed.
Yeah, that I can't really remember anything other than the few notes I wrote down.
Why don't you elaborate and tell us when you watched the episode? In hours ago.
Oh, what, about an hour and a half ago?
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I watched along with this with a friend, and I was expecting it to be a bit more interesting, considering that last week had some strangely intriguing stupidity to it. No, I had to apologize for showing this to them. Maybe the German doctor is some sort of Nazi reference, and it's a brilliant piece of black comedy that we're all missing.
Well, I don't think so. Maybe it just depends on what Germany, or rather the Prussian kingdom, was doing during the years of 1745 and 1746. Do we want to go look at it, though? Are we that interested? No.
I actually know, but...
oh, okay. Great. Helpful.
So they were seizing Silesia from Austria, or the Austrian Empire.
Alright, so they're having some fun down south. Marvellous.
Yes.
So it's nothing to do with Joseph Mengele?
No.
No.
Okay.
So, episode 2 of the Highlanders is thrown into the water to the sound of bagpipes. That's how you open episode 3, by destroying the tapes of episode 2. Yes, I'm reusing that joke. It's a good one. Ben, Jamie...
Well, you're just recapping the end of the last episode.
I am,
Yeah,
yes.
this is the reprise, Luke.
Yeah.
Yes. Ben, Jamie and Colin the Laird are thrown into the brig. Colin's finally recovered, so he can do some acting. And Ben almost gets killed by Scotsman before Colin pulls rank and say, "Hi, he's a friend of mine." This is the only point where Jamie actually does something, and we learn he's the son of Donald McCrimmon. No.
Oh yeah. Jamie descends back into doing nothing again this episode, as he said, which is... It's weird how they start to build him up the previous episode, only to revert back to him being an extra again.
Yes, whereas Kirsty gets a lot more screen time.
Yeah, you'd be forgiven for thinking Kirsty's going to be the next companion.
Yeah, so we learn of this new character, this Scotsman called Willie, and he's there to just shout at people. And they learn of Trask's third-party business of selling slaves. Everything in the boat this episode is not really interesting, and the actiony bit that does happen isn't really interesting either.
Doesn't lead anywhere.
No.
Interestingly, Ben says, what? Are we being treated like prisoners of war? And that is a very out of place 21st century reference, or 20th century reference in this case. And does he not get that the conditions would be horrible back then, even for people who had money? It's such a isolated, innocent abroad standpoint to take that it's gone beyond these people from the past, aren't they all stupid, to just like an ignorance of the past. It's so weird. I don't get it.
And that ignorance will quickly turn to apathy, and then the entire point of historicals has dropped. Great. We're going along the conveyor belt of let's destroy historicals. Or rather, we move on from this to mad scientist takes over the world with octopus, or Cybermen invade the moon. Yeah. So we can go to Polly and Kirsty, who complain of clothes, do a weird continuity reference to the smugglers, and then dress up as prostitutes to get into the tavern.
Yes, but it is pretty weird that but the line she says, "Oh, about not liking wearing boys' clothes," which I thought, well, that's a bit weird, and it has just contrasted with how she's acting in the previous episode, where she's being strong-willed, etc., etc.
If anything, it's reinforcing the gender stereotype.
Yeah, it's pretty anti-feminist and anti. It's a bit. It's not misogynistic, but it's going that it's very traditional, which is a bit weird. Her character in this is all over the place, really, I think. And then Ben doesn't really. He hasn't got the problem of him being inconsistent in his portrayal, because he's basically got no character in this. In this serial, he literally is sort of just there.
So yes, the action centres on a tavern in Inverness, because never mind the Battle of Culloden happening 10 miles south. Never mind. So Polly and Kirsty get their way in by dressing as common wenches and are promptly manhandled, which is something. History, why not? Or rather present, depending on the context. 1967 and 66. There's blackmail aplenty happening between Finch and his sergeant, who have gone there because, let's face it, they've had a terrible day.
It is, at this point, we finally get to an anything in this episode. We have some sort of impact on the plot, as opposed to an introduction where it's talking about nothing, to things we're just going to see anyway, to a conversation about oranges, which might have been funny in the author's head, but isn't. And now finally, we've got our two leads talking to the villains. Nothing really comes out of it, except Finch looks like a pampered English idiot.
Also in this tavern is literally everybody else for plot convenience, including the Doctor, who is still dressed in drag. You lucky, lucky people. Gets to overhear Polly getting Finch's name wrong, which is a very poor script error. So, yeah, it must have been a rough script, like you said, Luke. And then there's an odd pacing decision where Polly and Kirsty have previously checked the prison off-screen before going to the tavern, which sounds a bit rushed. Can we film this? No? Alright, then we'll chuck it in as a line. It's all over the place, this one.
This failed as pacing, it failed in language, fails in character and comedy. It's
And
got
drama.
nothing. And drama. It failed.
Yeah, Perkins dashes in because we needed yet another character in one scene in one tavern. Stops the Doctor from having lines or plot relevance. And is here to tell about his evil plans, give the rebel soldiers the chance between life and death, which is portraying slavery as a very good third option. Oh, but yeah, it's unimpactful. So there. Back on the ship, Solicitor Grey, who has got there with lightning speed, if I think about it, dupes the Scots to say that the king has pardoned them, in inverted commas, and tries to persuade the rebels to work for him legally. It's a weird plot. I'm going to sell these rebels as slaves, bypassing the king's orders to slaughter them as traitors and use them for my own ends to make profit. Ah, but I'm going to do it legally because I'm a solicitor.
It's sort of a series of unfortunate events. If anyone out there has read the hugely popular series, it descends very quickly into I'm the woodcutter. I solve all the problems by cutting wood. And there's the shopkeeper in the hospital one at the beginning, and every line that he says is about his shop. Solicitor Grey reminds me of that sort of series of unfortunate events character. My plan is entirely based around me being a solicitor, because it's in my name, and is therefore my whole character. And you know what? He's morally grey.
Oh my goodness me.
Did you see what he did there?
I think it was literally convenient because Solicitor Grey is an actual historical figure.
Is he?
He is.
Oh my God.
He's the only one. He knows full well that the Scotsmen won't agree to sign away their liberty, having threatened them to get to the ship in the first place. So he calls it his chance to work for your eventual liberty. Ben does the really strange thing of actually reading the contract, which basically portrays the Scots as illiterate.
Even though they probably were back then, so it is accurate.
He tears it up in an act of rebellion, which is like the most actiony this ship will get in this episode, and gets knocked out for his efforts. Grey showing his strength as slave master, I guess. 12 years a slave, this isn't, folks.
It felt like 12 years, though.
Great. Wonderful. It gets worse, I'm afraid, because back in the tavern, Perkins manages to outwit Polly and Kirsty, which is a very weird hierarchy. This dumb clerk manages to outwit these two girls. Brilliant. It's not portraying our heroines in a lovely light. Jerry Davis doesn't do feminism, does he?
No.
No. So it's up to the Doctor to save the day, so he joins for a game of whist with his third terrible accent, old hag. If there's one thing we can praise this episode for, I guess it's Patrick Troughton, who is nothing but versatile. 6 episodes ago, he was a defiant hero going, I shall stop you. And now he's going, perhaps you'd like to count the trumps? Oh, great.
Yeah, it's
That's a
quite
political
change.
reference we didn't need. Right. Yeah, blackmail happens and all the heroes get out of the tavern safely. Whoop-de-doo.
I don't like the Doctor's plan here, where he decides to threaten the dim-witted butler with an actual gun, which seems a bit undoctorish to me. Also, his plan is to then give everyone guns, which seems a bit undoctorish as well.
We get to the barn hideout, where some chatter between Polly and the Doctor turns into some of the strangest lines I've ever heard in Doctor Who. You know, those dresses really do suit you, Doctor. Oh, you saucy girl. Right, fine, thank you, Troughton. I don't want to hear that ever again. So, eventually, between the Doctor trying to go to sleep, which is another undoctorish idea, but ultimately they slowly make a plan to use Finch's money to buy weapons to smuggle to the prisoners for them to rebel their way out on their own, which is very Bay of Pigs.
The first thing that needs addressing is Nick's point that it's undoctorish to use guns. The Doctor has no qualms with murder for the greater good, and therefore, unlike Batman, who doesn't like killing altogether, here in Doctor Who, there's no reason for him to dislike guns. Guns are actually a very good way to kill people, and he has no problem with anyone else having guns either. I guess they are a very swift ending to the story. But
Yeah, he's smart. Yeah, he shouldn't need to rely on them. It's a similar way to I imagine Sherlock Holmes shouldn't rely on violence or guns or whatever. He should be able to win by his own mental brilliance.
We could also link it back full circle to the return of Dr. Mysterio, where literally the last thing the Doctor does in that episode is promptly disable the bad guy's gun. Where does that stand in your theory?
well, disabling a gun that's pointed at you,
True.
that's not,
Yeah.
that's just sense. That's just survival.
Yeah, the Doctor is being very third-party-ish superpower, giving all the rebels guns through smuggling, which is hilarious given the last historical's name, and using basically Finch's money. He's sort of doing a reverse. No, he's literally doing Robin Hood, which Patrick Troughton is known to have acted in. He's literally stealing from the rich and giving it to the poor to rebel against the evil English. Back on the ship, God help us. Gray and Trask try to get the Highlanders to legally sign their rights again. They use some encouragement. They set up the cliffhanger. They're going to duck Ben into the sea. But yeah, this is just such a weird mix of illegal and illegal ways to gain money in Barbados, which was recently independent, I suppose, so it's quite contextual in 1966. So, Polly and Kirsty and the Doctor managed to get some weapons. The girls are humiliated again because they only managed to get a terrible horde, whilst the Doctor manages to get 1745's equivalent of WMDs with muskets and pistols. Not saying where he got it from, though, either. So, God knows what he did, haggling in Inverness for weapons. Kirsty's ring becomes plot relevant again, not that you care, because it's actually Bonnie Prince Charlie's ring that Colin manages to nick, because he once saved his life. I know, it's weird. Whether this is historically accurate or not remains to be seen.
All of Bonnie Prince Charlie's stuff seems to have been stolen. We got the hat, the blanket thingy from last episode, whatever that was, and now we've got his ring. Does he have anything left by this point?
Is he literally roaming naked across the Cairngorms as we speak? Or has he decided to take a dive into Loch Ness and he's actually the monster next to the Scarrison? He is
burgled beyond belief.
Yeah, he's the most robbed man in the world.
Yeah.
Poor sod.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So yeah, the Doctor eventually manages to get the ring from Kirsty, which he's going to use to bait Grey. Meanwhile, Ben is ducked. We are now repeating cliffhangers. And thus the episode just shudders to a halt, and we breathe a sigh of relief.
It's done.
Yes.
Hooray!
It's done. To reiterate, this episode failed.
It failed.
It really, really did.
But in order to try and understand a bit of why it failed, I decided to have a look through some of Jerry Davis's other work. What I found most interesting was that he did episode 1 of The Celestial Toymaker. The Celestial Toymaker is 4 episodes long. Episodes 2 and 3 are padding, but there's stuff happening. Episode 4 is padding with some rubbish conclusion. Episode 1, though, that is entirely people talking until we eventually get to a bit of something happening sort of near the end. Revenge of the Cybermen. It's all people talking. 10th Planets, episode 3 and 4, that's all people talking, moving from set to set. Episodes 1 and 2 of the 10th Planet, there's loads of stuff going on there. And Kit Pedler also wrote, he did the story for The War Machines. And that's full of stuff going on. I can sort of figure out that Jerry Davis, he knows how to sort of make people talk in a way which forces the plot along, juddering, stopping and starting. And when he's combined with Kit Pedler, who has a very basic understanding of character at times, when all of his characters go, I'm a human and I'm going for the right side of things, and then the Cybermen are all, we're unhuman. When you sort of force the two together, you can get a good story, which is what the 10th Planet was, and what the invasion turned out to be. Here, you have just the talking, you have just the Jerry Davis. Wrong. You are bad. You are very bad, and you have failed.
Yeah, so essentially Jerry Davis only works if he's in co-op with somebody who is more of an experienced writer, I guess.
No, just puts things in.
Oh.
This episode did not have things.
Okay.
No thing has happened. It was until I made a marker of this. Polly and Kirsty meet Finch at 6 minutes 40, and that's the first thing that happens. This episode has not a thing in it. He needs Kit Pedler to say, here are some things. He cannot do things, but things are good. Oh, God, this failed.
Oh dear. Our liking of Jerry Davis has decreased dramatically. All thanks because we're quite literally taking his pieces apart from Doctor Who episodes 50 years ago. Whoopee, we get to do it next week, folks. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes, where you can comment and rate us. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe, as well as other internety things, including Google Plus if you dare. We shall be back next week to massacre episode 4 of the Highlanders. It's the last hurdle, and we'll be glad to see the back of it. Until then, I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.